This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we are going way back in time to World War II to explore how the conflict really shook things up for women in the U.S. military.
Yeah.
We'll be getting all our info today from a really interesting episode of the Mr. Hutchings History podcast.
Okay.
And guys, let me tell you, you are in for some serious surprises.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they kind of have the stereotypical image of women in World War II, and it's a lot more than just what we see on the surface.
So before we get into the thick of it,
okay,
let's set the scene a little bit.
Right.
Before the whole world went to war in the 1940s, how did most Americans view women in the military?
Well, the prevailing view was pretty traditional,
Okay.
Women's place was pretty much seen as confined to nursing.
Yeah.
It was just seen as like an extension of their traditional caregiving roles.
Right.
And there was a lot of resistance at the time to the idea of women branching out beyond that.
Gotcha. So then World War II breaks out.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like the entire country has to shift gears.
Yeah.
How did this massive conflict force a shift in thinking about women's roles?
Well, the scale of the war effort was so massive that the military just needed all hands on deck. They realized they had to recognize the skills that women had beyond those traditional roles.
Okay, so that need for like every warm body that could contribute.
Yeah.
That's where we see the birth of the WAAC in 1942.
Exactly.
The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
Huge turning point.
Huge, right?
Well, it really was.
For the first time, American women could officially serve in roles beyond nursing.
Right.
It was a big deal.
Huge.
And paved the way for literally hundreds of thousands of women to contribute.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the Army, though, right?
No, you're right.
All branches needed help.
The need was across the board.
Yeah.
Every branch.
Yeah.
Navy established the WAVs.
Yeah.
Air Force had the WASP program. Even the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard formed their own women's reserves.
So we have all these organizations popping up.
Yeah.
What were these women actually doing? So were they just stuck behind desks?
A lot of people think, they were just doing paperwork.
Yeah.
But not at all.
No.
These women had tons of responsibilities.
Okay.
Way beyond admin tasks.
Like, give me some examples.
Okay, so think radio operators.
Okay.
Analyzing photographs.
Wow.
Lab technicians.
Interesting.
Forecasting the weather.
What?
Managing control towers.
Really?
All kinds of stuff.
Wow. So they really were.
They were vital
Yeah.
to keeping the entire war effort running smoothly.
That's incredible. And Mr. Hutchings even mentions that it wasn't all happening in safe offices, right? Some women were stationed in really dangerous locations.
Yeah, you're right to bring that up. Some of these women were facing the same dangers as the men.
It's heartbreaking to learn that 16 Army nurses were killed during the war.
It's a powerful reminder
Yeah.
that these women weren't just filling gaps, they were putting their lives on the line.
Okay, so we have the different organizations and the types of jobs.
Right.
I am curious about the WASP program.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Hutchings really highlights this as a compelling example.
Yeah.
So what made the WASP program so unique?
Well, the WASP, which stands for Women Airforce Service Pilots, were really trailblazers.
Okay.
Think about it. These women were highly skilled pilots.
Yeah.
Ferrying aircraft, training male gunners, undertaking really crucial missions.
Yeah.
So essentially, they were doing the same jobs as male pilots, but without the same recognition or benefits.
Wow. Why was that?
It really shows the deep inequalities that existed. Even though these women were making these huge contributions, there was a lot of resistance at the time to giving women full military status.
So even though they weren't officially recognized as soldiers, their contributions were acknowledged in other ways, right?
Absolutely. Over 1,600 women received military decorations for their service.
Wow.
And a lot of them earned combat-related honors. In the Pacific Theater alone, 565 WAACs received combat-related honors.
Really highlighting their direct involvement in those high-risk areas.
They were right there in the thick of it.
Did anyone high up ever acknowledge their importance?
Well, there's this really powerful quote from General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yeah.
who was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe.
Right.
He said, the contribution of the women of America, whether on the farm or in the factory or in uniform, to D-Day was a sine qua non of the invasion effort.
A sine qua non.
Yeah. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. He's basically saying that the invasion couldn't have happened without them.
That's exactly what it means.
Wow.
It shows just how vital women's contributions were.
Yeah.
Not just in supporting roles.
Right.
But in directly impacting how the war played out.
So how do historians view the period? Okay.
You've got the traditionalists. They recognize women's contributions.
Yeah.
But they still see it within that male-dominated military structure.
So they kind of see it as...
primarily supportive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you have the feminist perspective.
Okay.
And they view this period as like a turning point in the fight for gender equality.
Right.
They emphasize how women stepped up, challenged those traditional roles, and demonstrated their capabilities, and kind of shattered all those pre-existing notions of what women could do.
I see. What about the revisionist view?
Well, the revisionists, while they acknowledge the significant contributions, they also highlight the limitations of the progress that was made.
Right.
And the pushback that women faced after the war.
Yeah. It's kind of a reminder that the fight wasn't over.
It wasn't a straight line to equality.
Yeah. And lastly, there's the social history perspective.
Right. The social history lens focuses on the everyday experiences of women in the military.
Okay.
How did they navigate this male-dominated environment?
Yeah.
How did they challenge norms? How did their service shape their views on gender roles and their place in society?
It sounds like World War II had a long-lasting impact.
Oh, yeah.
On women in the military.
Definitely.
What were some of the long-term effects?
Well, one of the most significant outcomes was the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948.
Okay.
This was a huge piece of legislation. It granted women permanent status in the military.
Really?
And it made it possible for them to receive veteran benefits.
Wow.
Recognizing their service as equal to men's.
That sounds like a major victory.
It really was.
Yeah.
It formally acknowledged women's right to serve and be recognized.
So how did things progress from there?
Well, the path to modern times has seen continued expansion of women's roles in the military, but it definitely wasn't without its challenges.
Right.
Even though we had the Integration Act.
Yeah.
There were still restrictions. Yeah. Particularly when it came to combat roles.
Right. The combat exclusion policy.
Exactly.
It took decades for those barriers to finally be broken down.
Right. And it wasn't until 2013 that the combat exclusion policy was finally lifted.
Wow.
Allowing women to officially serve in combat roles.
It's amazing to think about how far things have come.
Yeah.
Since those early days of the WAC.
It's incredible. It really shows the perseverance and determination of all these women who fought for their rightful place.
This has been really insightful so far.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
We've learned about the different organizations, the jobs women held, the risks they faced, and the long-term impact of their service.
And it's a story that deserves to be told.
Absolutely.
And retold.
Now, in the next part of our deep dive, we are going to get even more personal.
Oh, great.
We'll delve into the individual stories of these really remarkable women, exploring their challenges, the prejudices they overcame, and how their service really shaped their lives.
These personal accounts are so powerful.
Yeah.
They really bring history to life.
Totally.
And help us understand the impact on a human level.
I can't wait to hear them.
You're going to love it.
See you next time.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I am ready for some of those personal stories.
Me too. It's one thing to talk about the big picture stuff.
Right.
But it's those individual experiences that really bring it home.
Absolutely. So in the first part, we talked about how almost 350,000 women served across all branches.
Yeah, it's a huge number.
To really grasp their impact, though, we need to, hear their voices.
Totally.
Their stories.
Right.
So where do we start? Does Mr. Hutchings share any specific stories?
Oh, yeah, he does. He talks about the experiences of women like Anne Baumgartner Carl, who was a Joe T pilot.
Wow.
Imagine being a young woman, barely out of your teens, and you're flying military aircraft.
Really?
Facing the same risks as the men, but without the same recognition.
That's incredible. What kind of missions did she fly?
Oh, she ferried all kinds of aircraft.
Okay.
Fighters, bombers.
Oh.
From factories to bases all over the country.
It must have been so dangerous.
It was dangerous work.
Yeah.
Requiring incredible skill.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the pressure?
I can't even imagine.
Knowing that the war effort
Yeah.
depended in part on her and the other women.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the flying, it was the whole environment, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the 1940s, women were still fighting for basic rights.
Like equal pay.
Yeah.
To vote.
To enter the military like that must have been daunting.
It was a different time for sure.
Did she ever talk about facing discrimination?
You know, Mr. Hutchings mentions how the WASP program was met with a lot of resistance from some people in the military. Some people just flat out didn't believe that women could fly these complex planes.
How does she respond to that?
By proving them wrong.
Yeah.
She and the other WASPs showed everyone how skilled and professional they were.
That's so inspiring.
They really earned the respect of a lot of people who doubted them at first.
They were breaking down barriers.
They were forced people to really rethink what women were capable of.
It's amazing to think about how that must have changed their own views.
Absolutely.
About themselves.
It must have been so empowering to face those challenges, to prove everyone wrong.
It showed them what they were really capable of.
Right.
And I bet there was a lot of camaraderie among those women.
Oh, absolutely.
Going through something like that together.
Mr. Hutchings talks about how the WASPs formed these really close friendships.
Yeah.
They supported each other. They celebrated each other's successes.
They were pioneers.
They were.
It's so powerful to think about.
Yeah. Their determination in the face of all those obstacles.
And their service didn't end with the war.
Right.
A lot of these women continue to advocate for women's rights.
It's too bad that even after their service, they still face those setbacks.
It's a shame, but it reminds us that progress isn't always easy.
Right.
It's not a straight line.
So we talked about individual experiences.
Right.
I am curious about the bigger picture.
Okay.
The long-term impact on women's roles in the military.
Yeah. Well, World War II was definitely a turning point.
Okay.
It proved that women could serve in so many different roles.
It shattered that old myth.
It did.
That women were too fragile for military life.
Exactly.
And even though there was some pushback after the war, things had changed.
They had.
It wasn't just a temporary thing.
It was a lasting change.
Okay. And it laid the groundwork for future progress.
Right.
Like the Women's Armed Services Integration Act.
Exactly.
That we talked about before. That wouldn't have been possible without World War II.
It granted women permanent status.
Yes.
It was a huge step forward.
It was.
It's fascinating to trace that path.
Yeah.
From the WAAC to the lifting of the combat exclusion policy in 2013.
It's a long road.
It is.
But it shows that fight for equality.
Yeah.
That continued.
The story of women in World War II isn't just history.
No.
It's part of a much bigger story.
Yeah.
The fight for women's rights.
Absolutely.
So as we head into the final part of our deep dive, it's important to think about the wider societal impact.
Yeah, the ripple effects.
Their service didn't just affect the military, it affected families.
It did.
Communities.
The whole fabric of American culture.
It's a fascinating story.
In the next part, we will explore those ripple effects.
Right.
How it influenced the workforce, family dynamics, American culture.
It's a really important part of the story.
I can't wait.
You're going to love it.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. It's incredible to think about the wider societal impact of women's service during the war.
Yeah, it really is. We've talked a lot about the military side of things.
Right.
But these women were also daughters, sisters, wives, mothers.
Exactly.
Their service had this ripple effect that went way beyond the battlefield.
So what happened when they came home?
It was a time of massive change.
Right.
You know, before the war.
Yeah.
Traditional gender roles
were
really deeply ingrained.
Right.
Women were expected to be homemakers.
Yeah.
Focus on domestic duties.
But then the war changed all that.
Yeah. The war effort really threw those norms right out the window.
Millions of women stepped into the workforce.
Millions.
Taking on jobs that had always been done by men.
Right. Building ships, operating machinery in factories.
Yeah.
Working in science and engineering.
It was a huge shift.
It was a seismic shift.
And it wasn't just about filling those labor shortages.
Right.
These women proved that they could do it. They challenged those societal norms.
And they changed people's perceptions.
I can only imagine how that must have made them feel.
Oh, absolutely.
To go from being told your place is in the home to suddenly being essential to the war effort.
Mr. Hutchings actually shares some really great stories about this.
Okay.
He talks about how these women found this new sense of purpose. They discovered their own strength, their resilience.
And I bet a lot of them didn't want to give that up.
No, a lot of them weren't content to just go back to being homemakers.
So what happened when the men came home?
Well, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
There was definitely this pressure on women to go back to how things were.
Right.
Some women did that, and they were happy to rebuild family life.
Okay.
But a lot of women weren't satisfied with that.
Yeah.
They'd experienced independence. They'd proven themselves. They wanted more.
I bet that created some tension.
There were definitely challenges.
Yeah.
Some men had trouble adjusting to this new reality. But for other families, it was an opportunity to create a more equal partnership.
Did this experience have a lasting impact on the women's rights movement?
Absolutely.
Okay.
World War II showed everyone what women could do when they were given the chance.
Right.
It really fueled the fight for equal pay education opportunities.
Political representation.
Exactly.
It's like they came home and said, look, we just helped win a war.
Right.
We can handle anything.
And you can't forget the cultural impact.
Yeah, like Rosie the Riveter.
Exactly.
They became this icon
She did.
of female empowerment.
It's amazing to see how those wartime experiences are still relevant today.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about winning the war.
Right.
It was about women claiming their place in society.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
It's so important to remember that these stories aren't just about the past.
They're not.
They're about the fight for equality that's still going on today.
That's a great point.
The fight for recognition.
Yeah.
For everyone to reach their full potential.
Absolutely.
No matter their gender.
Well said.
So for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
what do you think? How can we honor the legacy of these incredible women?
How can we make sure their stories aren't forgotten?
Yeah.
Their experiences teach us so much about courage.
Resilience.
Yeah, and the importance of fighting for a more just world.
That's a perfect note to end on.
I think so.
Thank you all so much for joining us
Yeah, thanks for listening.
on this incredible journey into the past.
Yeah.
And remember, history isn't just something we read about in books.
Right.
It shapes who we are and the world we live in.
That's right.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.